New Mexico Territory, 1876. Lena Hart stood tied to the market post in red dust, wrists bleeding, as half the town screamed for her to be cleansed of the sins she never chose. Reverend Pike's voice thundered through the dust while a boy hurled a stone that split her lip, and nobody, not one soul, stepped forward to stop it. Her breath trembled as she realized they didn't just want to punish her. They wanted her gone. If this is the day I die, she thought, no one will remember my name. Before we continue, if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, leave your city name in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun over red dust didn't just burn, it judged. It hammered down on the market square like heaven itself had turned its face away, leaving only heat and harsh eyes behind. And right there in the middle of it all stood Lena Hart, wrists tied high against the whipping post, breath trembling even as she held her chin steady. Her dress was nothing but faded cotton and stubborn stitches, dust clinging to every seam. She looked like a girl who'd been fighting the world so long she didn't remember how to stop. People circled her in a slow, hungry ring, all murmurs and brimstone. "Con Huang," someone hissed. "No blood to speak of." Same as her daddy, trash breeds trash. Lena swallowed hard. Shame was a familiar taste to her, bitter, metallic, almost comforting in a twisted way. But today it came sharper, crueler. She wasn't sure if it was the rope burning her wrists, or the knowledge that not a single soul here wanted to believe she was worth a damn. Reverend Pike stepped forward like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. The man moved slow, savoring each step, boots tapping wood like a gavel calling for judgment. He lifted his Bible high, eyes shining with something far from holy. "Sin must be named," he declared, voice booming across the square. "Darkness must be dragged into the light so this town may stay pure." Lena bit the inside of her cheek till she tasted blood. Pure. They loved that word. Loved pretending purity was something they owned like land or cattle. Pike gestured toward her with a sweep of his hand. "This girl, this wayward child, carries the stain of her father's wickedness. Drunkenness, violence, thievery of spirit. Blood follows blood." A few townsfolk nodded like cattle being herded toward the same lie they'd chosen for years. Lena whispered, barely audible, "I ain't him." But no one cared to hear soft truths when loud lies felt better. On the edge of the crowd, Malachi Cole stood still as carved stone, tall, broad-shouldered, skin dark as night and dusted with trail grit. A man folks avoided making eye contact with, because they didn't understand him, and what they didn't understand, they feared. He didn't join in the muttering, didn't bow his head when Pike commanded the crowd to pray. He simply watched Lena with a steady, uncomfortable intensity, as if he saw through all the noise straight to the quiet hurt she tried to hide. And that alone made Lena's breath catch. Pike slammed the Bible shut, the crack echoing. "For debts unpaid and pride unrepented, Lena Hart shall bear the shame her bloodline earned." A man in the crowd spat near her boots. "Apple doesn't fall far, does it?" Lena forced her voice past the tightness in her throat. My father ain't here to answer, so you all pick the easiest target. That's enough, Pike snapped. Your father made his choice. You'll answer for it if you won't. Lena's stomach twisted. Answer for it. She'd been answering her whole life. Every insult thrown at Elias Hart landed on her first. Every rumor dragged her name lower. She never knew whether folks hated her father for what he'd done, or hated her for daring to exist after he did it. A rough shove from behind made her stumble against the post. Someone laughed. She's shaking. Look at her. She was. Her whole body trembled, though she tried to hide it. Fear slid under her skin like ice water. What if this time went further? What if they didn't stop at words? What if... Her breath caught again, but not from fear this time. Malachi moved. Not much. Not even a full step. Just enough to break away from the shadow of the storefront and let sunlight hit his face. Enough so the town could see he was watching, measuring, deciding. Conversations faltered. No one knew what a man like Malachi might do. He'd lived alone on Coal Creek Ranch since his brother died. Quieter than silence and twice as hard to read. Folks whispered he'd been through war, loss, heartbreak, things that carved him deep. He walked toward the circle, and the way the crowd parted didn't look like respect. It looked like survival. Pike stiffened. This is town business, Mr. Cole. Maybe so, Malachi said, voice low, smooth, and dangerous in how calm it stayed. But you speak heavy things about sin, and heavy things deserve steady eyes. Pike bristled. This girl stands condemned. Malachi's gaze rested on Lena. Her breath hitched when his eyes met hers. Eyes that didn't judge, didn't mock. They simply saw her. Saw the exhaustion, the humiliation, the break in her voice she wouldn't let out loud. That right? He murmured. She tried to look strong, but the tremor in her lip betrayed her. I didn't do what they're saying, but it don't matter. He studied the rope biting into her wrists. Looks like it matters. A murmur rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. No one expected him to speak on her behalf. No one expected anyone to. Pike lifted the Bible again. You overstep, Mr. Cole. Malachi didn't even look at him. Maybe all of you have been overstepping for a long time. The crowd stiffened. Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years. An ache in her chest. A tiny bloom of warmth pressing through the bruised edges of her ribs. Hope. Small. Quiet. Dangerous. She didn't know why this man stepped forward. Didn't know what it meant. But she felt something shift in the dust around her feet. As if the ground itself dared to believe her story wasn't finished yet. Malachi moved one more step toward her. A choice. A promise. A line drawn. And for the first time that day, Lena Hart felt the faintest tremble of her heart saying, You ain't alone. The road home always felt longer when Lena walked it alone. Dust clung to her boots, her wrists stung with every step, and her breath kept catching, like her lungs were trying to cry even though her eyes refused to. She didn't want the tears, not in daylight, not where anyone could see. The cabin waited at the end of a dry wash, leaning sideways like it wished it could lie down and quit. Smoke seeped from the crooked chimney, thin, sour, the kind that told her exactly what she'd find inside. She pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like they were tired of the same story. Elias Hart lay slumped in his chair, an empty bottle rolling under his boot as he shifted. His gray beard was tangled, his shirt half-buttoned, and his eyes, when they cracked open, held that glassy confusion that came before the apology he'd never quite finish. "Lena, that you?" he rasped. "It's me." She tried to sound gentle, but her voice wavered. He sat up, blinking. Then his gaze caught the raw rope burns on her wrists. His face pinched, part shame, part fury, part the old pain he drowned every night. "They did that to you?" His words were thick, but the hurt behind them was sober. "They did," she whispered. He opened his mouth like he had something righteous to say, something fatherly, protective, fierce. But the words tangled in the fog of whiskey. His shoulders sagged. She knew that sag well. It was the weight of a man who'd wanted to do right once and never quite managed. Her chest tightened. It wasn't his fault. Not all of it. But the world blamed him, and the world blamed her for being his. She knelt by the water bucket and washed the burns. The water was gritty, lukewarm, and tasted faintly of iron, just like every hard truth in her life. Elias exhaled, a shuddery breath. "Didn't sell you," he muttered, voice slurring. Didn't let him take you. I kept you safe, best I could." Her hands froze. "Pa, what are you talking about?" But he'd already slid deeper into that half-sleep where old memories tangled with nightmares. He mumbled something else, broken, panicked, like a man fighting shadows. "They wanted you. Taking names, changing papers. I tried, Lena. Tried." Lena felt a cold ripple run through her. What papers? Who wanted? Why did his voice shake like he was remembering something worse than shame? She whispered, "Pa?" and touched his shoulder. He flinched hard, like her hand was fire. "Don't let him near you," he croaked. "Not again. Not again." That phrase wrapped around her like a rope, squeezing tight. She sat back slowly, heart pounding against ribs that suddenly felt too small. Elias often talked nonsense when drunk, but this felt like something else, something that lived under his skin, something that scared him sober. Her voice came out small. "What did you do, Pa? What did they do?" But he was gone, lost in sleep, breath rattling shallow and uneven. Lena pressed her palm against her eyes. She wanted to scream, wanted to hate him, wanted to love him. All of it twisted inside her until she couldn't breathe right. She stood up too fast, and the room tilted. Dinner was a handful of dried beans and a scrap of stale bread. She forced it down anyway. Hunger was something she'd learned to ignore, same as humiliation, same as loneliness. But tonight, both felt heavier. A sudden knock made her jump. Not a knock, more like a soft clink. She opened the door a crack. Hanging from the nail outside was a rusty horseshoe, shaped into a makeshift charm with a strip of rawhide. Her breath caught. Malachi Cole had left it. She knew without question. He hadn't left a note. Men like him didn't need notes. But she understood. A silent gesture meant I saw you. You deserved better. Her throat tightened. She took the horseshoe down, palms brushing the worn metal. It felt strangely warm, like it carried someone else's quiet strength. "What are you doing, Malachi Cole?" she murmured, half angry, half grateful. "Stepping into business that ain't yours." But her voice trembled in the one place no one could see. She closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood. A single thought slipped through her defenses, uninvited and unwelcome. Why would a man like him care about a girl like me? The question scared her more than the crowd had. She turned, saw Elias slumped in the chair again, and a sharp ache twisted deep inside her. She walked over, fixed a blanket over his shoulders, just like she'd done 100 nights before. "You ain't a bad man," she whispered into the dim room. "Just broken, and I'm tired of paying for it." Her words trembled like thin glass. Elias didn't answer. Lena drew in a slow breath, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and sat on the floor beside his chair, close enough to listen to the fragile rise and fall of his chest. Because even with all the pain, he was the only family she had. Outside, the wind carried voices from town, laughter, arguments, the clatter of boots. Life in red dust went on without her, like it always had. But on the nail by her door hung a rusty horseshoe, a small thing, a foolish thing, a dangerous thing to hope for. Yet Lena Hart felt something shift, small as a heartbeat. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely invisible. And in the quiet, she let herself believe, for the first time in years, that tomorrow might hurt a little less than today. Morning came rough in red dust, always did. But that day it felt a little less merciless. Maybe it was the faint warmth creeping through the cracks of the cabin walls. Or maybe it was the rusty horseshoe still hanging beside the door, catching the sun like it had something to say. Lena wasn't sure she wanted to listen. She stepped outside with a tin cup of weak coffee, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Her wrists still burned, but she held them close to her chest, as if hiding the marks made them hurt less. The wind carried a thin whistle. Not a bird, not a man. A giggle. She stiffened. Red Dust's children had two modes around her, fear or mockery. Neither she had room in her heart for today. But then a small voice piped up, soft and unsure. "Miss Lena." Her breath paused. Half hidden behind the stump near her steps were 3 children, dust-covered and wide-eyed. Little Clara Bell, scrawny Benji Cobb, and Maggie. Maggie, barefoot, hair in a messy braid, freckles bright as sunrise, held a stick like it was a ticket of courage. "We came to learn letters," she blurted, way too loud for her tiny frame. Benji elbowed her. "We ain't supposed to tell her that part first." Lena stared. "Learn letters? From who?" "From you," Clara whispered. "You teach better'n Reverend Pike. He makes us copy verses that ain't even about letters." Maggie took a tiny step closer. "You taught me M last week, by the well. Remember?" Lena remembered. She'd traced an M in the dirt with her boot without thinking, and Maggie had drawn it back, proud as anything. She swallowed. "You kids shouldn't be here. Folks'll talk." Benji shrugged a shoulder. "They talk anyway." That pierced something inside her, something tender and tired. "Please, Miss Lena," Maggie asked. Her lip trembled. "I want to know my whole name, not just the part they let us say." Lena felt her heart twist, tight and painful. Her whole name. She didn't know why that request hurt, or why Maggie's longing felt familiar. Maybe because Lena had never spoken her own name without hearing someone spit her father's beside it. A breath escaped her, soft as a surrender. "All right," she murmured. "Just this once." The children lit up like dawn breaking. She led them behind the cabin where the earth was flat enough to write. Lena crouched, drew a shaky line in the dirt. "This here's the start of a letter," she said. "We'll make it into something." Maggie knelt next to her, eyes following every movement. "What letter?" she asked. Lena's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "Why don't you guess?" Maggie squinted. "Is it J?" "No." Lena chuckled softly. "Try again." Benji flopped down and groaned. "It's an L. Ain't it obvious?" "It ain't obvious to her," Lena scolded lightly. "Let her learn." The girl looked up at Lena with this shining, hopeful look. A look that hit Lena harder than the rope burns ever had. It felt like somebody had opened a window inside her chest. Then a shadow fell across the dirt. Lena straightened too fast, heart jerking. But it wasn't Pike. It wasn't Silas. It was Malachi Cole, standing a few yards away with the reins of his horse draped loosely over one hand. He looked at her first, always at her, before glancing at the kids. His voice was quiet, warm gravel. "You're gathering quite a school here." Lena felt her face burn. "It's not a school, just keeping 'em busy." Benji piped up. "She's teaching us letters, Mr. Cole. She's real good at it." Malachi's eyes softened. "That so?" Lena bristled, embarrassed. "I told 'em not to come." Still did. She hated how true that felt. These children wanted her for something other than a target. Malachi stepped forward and set a small bundle by the stump. "Picked these up in town. Figured you could use 'em." She frowned. "What is it?" "Chalk. Couple scrap boards from the mill. Better than dirt, I'd say." She froze. That was more kindness than she knew how to hold. "You shouldn't," she whispered. People will think you're taking sides. He met her eyes, steady and deliberate. Maybe I am. Her breath caught, and she hated that he could do that so easily. Before she could respond, a sharp whistle cut across the wash. Reverend Pike's voice carried from the road. "Maggie! Benji! Clara! You get back to the church this instant!" The children scrambled, fear flashing across their faces. Maggie grabbed Lena's hand before running. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Lena squeezed her small fingers, throat tight. "If you're brave enough." Maggie grinned. "I am." They scattered, leaving dust and little footprints behind. Lena stared after them until the wash fell quiet again. Malachi spoke softly. "They trust you." "I ain't sure they should. Maybe they know something you don't." She hugged her arms around herself. "I don't want trouble." "In this town," he said, "trouble don't wait for permission." Something in his tone, firm, protective, slipped into her ribs, warm and dangerous. She looked away. "Why are you being kind to me?" Malachi considered her for a long, quiet moment. "Because you look like someone who's been standing alone too long." Her breath shivered. He tipped his hat and turned back to his horse. Lena watched until he disappeared over the rise, the sun catching the back of his coat like a promise. Then she looked down at the chalk in her hands. For the first time in years, something inside her dared to bloom. A little hope, a little warmth, a little belief that maybe the world still had room for someone like her. And that tiny, trembling hope whispered, "This ain't the end of your story, Lena Hart. Not if you don't let it be." The next morning rose warm, softer than usual, a kind of quiet that felt almost borrowed, like the land was giving Lena a moment she didn't quite earn, but desperately needed. She stepped outside early, clutching the little tin of chalk Malachi had left her. She hadn't slept much, mind replaying every word the children said, and every look Malachi gave her. Hope was dangerous. She kept telling herself that, but it still tugged at her chest like a stubborn thread. She didn't have long to think. "Miss Lena!" Maggie barreled toward her with the speed of a prairie wind, bare feet hitting the dirt like she owned it. Two other kids ran behind her, Benji and Clara, with another pair trailing shyly. Lena blinked. "There's more of you today." "Benji said you was teaching nice," Clara added, as if reporting a rare natural phenomenon. "And Maggie told Ruthie you let us spell our real names." Maggie puffed with pride. "'Cause it matters." Lena knew those words weren't just childish excitement. They were longing, deep, old, carved-in longing. Kids like them rarely heard that their names mattered. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "All right," she said quietly. "Come on. Let's get started before anyone sees." They settled under the crooked cottonwood behind her cabin, the only shade wide enough for them all. Lena broke the chalk in half and handed it around. The kids stared at the white sticks like they were something magical. "Can we write on the boards?" Ruthie asked. Lena nodded. "You write wherever you can learn." She knelt beside Maggie first. "Now, yesterday we wrote the letter L, you remember?" Maggie nodded fast. "'Cause that's how your name starts." Lena tried not to smile too wide. That's right. But today we'll work on yours. M? Maggie asked hopefully. No, Lena said gently. Your whole name, not just the part folks you live with say. The girl's breath hitched, quiet, almost scared. Nobody ever taught me that. Well, Lena said, voice warming despite herself, seems like it's time someone did. She took Maggie's small hand and guided the chalk across the board, forming each curve carefully. Maggie mouthed the sounds. The more she tried, the brighter her eyes got. Around them, the other children scribbled crooked letters and giggled every time someone made a shape that looked more like a tumbleweed than a letter. It felt normal, soft, human. Something Lena hadn't felt in years. She didn't hear footsteps at first, not until Clara's eyes widened over Lena's shoulder. "Mr. Cole!" she squeaked. Lena jerked upright, heart leaping into her throat. Malachi stood a short distance away, one hand on the reins of his horse, the other resting on his belt like he wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. He looked different today, less distant, more present. Lena felt heat crawl up her neck. "I told you, kids, not to bother Mr. Cole," she scolded gently. "They didn't bother me," Malachi said. "I was just riding fence, saw the lesson going on." His gaze slid to Maggie's board. "Looks good." Maggie beamed like she'd been handed the keys to the whole territory. Lena coughed, suddenly self-conscious. "We're keeping it quiet. Pike won't like this." "No," Malachi agreed. "He won't." He didn't elaborate, but the warning in his voice hung heavier than a storm cloud. The kids continued riding, but Lena could feel his presence like warmth at her back, a shield she didn't ask for but couldn't bring herself to refuse. Malachi stepped closer. "You need help building a lean-to for shade," he said. "Kids shouldn't be out in open sun." She frowned. "You can't just—" "I can," he said simply. "If you want me to." Her breath twisted. She wasn't used to people offering help with no strings attached. She wasn't used to anyone choosing her for anything. And Malachi Cole? A man who barely spoke to anyone? Him choosing her felt like something she wasn't allowed to dream about. She looked down. "You shouldn't get involved." "Too late," he murmured. The words knocked the air out of her chest. Before she could gather herself, a shrill voice shattered the quiet. "Well, ain't this a sight?" Lena stiffened. Mrs. Thatch, one of Pike's most loyal gossips, stood at the ridge, hands on her hips. "Teaching heathens again, are ya?" she sneered. "You ain't got the right." The children huddled close. Maggie reached for Lena's skirt, trembling. Lena's pulse spiked. She opened her mouth to defend them, but the fear rose too fast, too sharp. Words tangled on her tongue. Malachi stepped forward calmly, but with the controlled force of a man capable of rearranging the world if pushed hard enough. "Ma'am," he said, voice low but iron steady, "you best mind your manners round children trying to learn." Mrs. Thatch's jaw dropped. "You speaking up for her? A heart girl? You out of your head?" "No," Malachi said. "Just tired of watching good folks get trampled." Lena felt her throat close. Good folks? Her? Mrs. Thatch backed away with a huff, muttering threats about telling Reverend Pike. As she disappeared, the children whispered anxiously. Lena knelt down, touched Maggie's cheek. You're safe. Long as I'm here, you're safe. Malachi's voice came from behind her, quiet as a prayer. Long as I'm here, too. She froze. Something fragile inside her, something she thought burned away years ago, began stitching itself back together. Slowly, carefully, tender as morning light. The kids returned to their letters, leaning closer, trusting more. Lena watched them, her heart swelling with protectiveness so fierce she didn't know where to put it. Malachi lingered, leaning on the fence rail, eyes softening every time she lifted her head. Not intrusive, not demanding. Just there. Like a man choosing where to stand, and choosing her corner. And under the shade of that crooked cottonwood, with chalk dust settling on small hands and hope flickering like a shy flame, Lena Hart felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long, long time. Warmth, belonging, the start of a family she never expected, even if the world wasn't ready to let her have one. Red dust always found a way to ruin a good morning. By noon that day, Lena's lesson under the cottonwood had dissolved into whispers, kids slipping away before Pike or one of his shadows came looking. The boards were tucked behind the stump. The chalk dust brushed from their hands like erasing a secret. But secrets had a way of stirring dust in that town, and the dust was already rising. Lena was sweeping the small porch when she saw 3 riders approaching from the ridge. Mayor Silas Greeley, Reverend Pike, and Mr. Klein from the land office. They rode like men who believed the ground owed them obedience. Her grip tightened on the broom handle. Elias's words from the night before drifted through her mind. I kept you safe. Tried. She wasn't sure if the tremble in her belly was fear or the beginning of anger. The riders slowed at her fence. Pike didn't bother with a greeting. You've been teaching again. Lena kept her chin high. Children need letters. That ain't a sin last I checked. Silas smiled the way a rattlesnake might. Slow, patient, amused at prey that didn't yet know it was prey. In this town, he said, we decide what's a sin. Klein cleared his throat, shuffling a stack of folded papers. We've convened he glanced at Silas, a moral committee. We need to discuss certain matters. Committee? Lena scoffed. Since when? Since behavior began threatening the peace. Pike's eyes narrowed. Since a girl too close to her father's sins decided she deserved better than her lot. That one hit soft, but deep. Lena swallowed hard. What do you want from me? Silas gestured toward the road. We'd like to speak with Mr. Cole as well. No, Lena said immediately. You leave him out of this. Pike's lips thinned. He's involved when he shelters a problem. Problem. Not person, not woman, not teacher. Lena felt her breath hitch. Malachi ain't sheltering me. He's just breaking order, Silas cut in. And that ranch of his sits on land that requires proper oversight. He nodded to Klein. Don't it? Klein shoved forward a sheet of paper. He's been summoned to town hall tomorrow to review his ownership claim. If he refuses, the committee will deem him out of compliance. Lena felt the ground lean sideways. You'd take his land? She whispered. Pike's smile chilled her. We'd protect red dust from bad influences. And then he looked at her wrists, still raw from the ropes. You seem to require correction more often than most. She lifted her chin, even as her stomach turned. You really think hurtin' me makes this town holy? Silas leaned forward in his saddle, voice low enough only she could hear. You forget something, child. Your father earned this town's judgment. And you? He smirked. You carry his name, his blood. Her blood iced. Behind the men, the sky seemed to dim, like the whole world leaned in closer to hear the next breath. Leave, she managed. You made your point. They did leave, slowly, satisfied, dust rising behind them like a warning. Lena's knees almost buckled when they disappeared over the wash. She sank onto the porch step, pressing her palms to her eyes. Blood. Always blood, she whispered. Like it was a curse she couldn't wash off. She sat like that until she felt a shadow fall over her. Soft, steady, familiar. Malachi. He didn't say her name, didn't touch her, just lowered himself onto the step beside her, boots planted solid, shoulders broad enough to cast shade she could breathe under. They came by, he said quietly. Yeah, she whispered. What did they want? To scare me. Her voice shook. And to threaten you. I ain't scared. She huffed a humorless laugh. Well, I am. He finally turned, studying her face. His eyes softened at the red marks on her wrists. You been crying? She shook her head. No. He didn't call her out. Just waited. They said you gotta show up at town hall, she murmured. Something about reviewing your land. He nodded once. No surprise. No panic. I figured they'd try that. You can't lose that ranch, she whispered. Malachi rested his forearms on his knees, voice low. I ain't losing it. But they'll twist the law. No law worth having is twisted that easy. She stared at him. That certainty, strong, calm, immovable, settled into her bones like a warm weight. A promise she didn't deserve but desperately needed. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded scrap of paper. Yellowed, torn, edges frayed like it had lived too many lives. Lena blinked. What's that? He turned it over in his hands. Found it in Elias's pocket the night before he was found. Her breath caught. Pause. He nodded and offered it to her. She opened it with trembling fingers. It wasn't land papers. Wasn't a map. Wasn't a debt note. It was a partial birth record. Half a name. Half a signature. Half a story. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Why would Pa have this? Her voice thinned. Why didn't he tell me? Malachi spoke gently. He tried, Lena. Last time he came to see me. He tried. Tried. Those were the last words Elias said. Tried to keep you safe. Her vision blurred. It ain't making sense, she whispered. Why hide something like this? Maybe he didn't want you hurt. She closed her eyes. The ache in her chest crawled deeper. Malachi touched her shoulder. Not possessive, not hesitant. Just steady. You're not alone in this, he murmured. The words broke something inside her. Not the painful kind. No. Something protective. Something stubborn. Something that had kept her distant from anyone who might care. Turned slightly. You should stay away from me, Malachi. Folks'll use this to ruin you. His hand didn't move. They can try. She met his gaze, and the truth hit her like a held breath finally released. He wasn't saving her. He was choosing her. And for the first time in years, despite the threats, the papers, the judgment tightening around them like a noose, Lena Hart felt the faint spark of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Fragile. Trembling. But alive. The night came down fast, heavy as a wet blanket thrown over the desert. Coal Creek lay unusually quiet. No wind, no coyotes, just a silence that felt wrong. Lena paced inside the cabin, staring at the scrap of birth record Malachi had given her. Half a name, half a truth, and Elias's voice echoing in her skull. Didn't let him take you. Tried. The more she repeated it, the more her chest twisted. She pressed her palms against her eyes until sparks bloomed behind them. Pa, she whispered. What did you do? What did they do? The door creaked open. Malachi stepped in, bringing with him a gust of cool night air and a look that made her heart drop. He rarely looked shaken, but tonight, shadows clung to his face like something had unraveled. Lena, he said quietly, I need you to sit. She didn't. What happened? He hesitated, just long enough for dread to snake through her ribs. Tell me, she demanded, voice cracking. Malachi inhaled once. They found Elias. Her stomach twisted into a fist. Found him where? Down the South Ridge. His voice was steady but too soft. At the bottom. Bottom? She blinked. What bottom? He didn't answer with words, just looked at her with a grief that wasn't his but felt like he carried it anyway. And she understood. No, she whispered. No, he don't go down there. Pa can't walk the ridge sober, much less. No. Malachi stepped toward her. Lena. She backed away, hands shaking violently. You're wrong. They're wrong. He's probably just laid out in the barn, drunk again. Or sleeping it off. He wouldn't go near that ridge. Lena. No. Her breath came fast and thin. He promised he wouldn't wander no more. The silence after her words felt like the entire cabin holding its breath. Finally, Malachi said quietly, "It wasn't the fall that killed him." Her heart stopped. He continued, slow and painful. "They said he was drunk, passed out, slipped down the slope. But—" his jaw clenched. "Lena, the bottle beside him wasn't his brand." Something inside her snapped like a frayed rope. "He was murdered?" she whispered. "I don't know, but it don't sit right, and folks don't seem keen on asking questions." Lena's breath trembled. She sank to her knees, hands burying into her skirt. Sobs forced their way out, raw, uncontained, the kind she'd spent years swallowing. Malachi knelt beside her, not touching, just close enough she could feel the heat of his presence. "He was trying to tell me something," she choked out. "Last night. Something about names, papers, people trying to take me. He said he didn't sell me. He said... Her voice broke into pieces. Malachi's face tightened. "He was protecting you, Lena." "Protecting me from what?" she cried. "From who?" Her fingers scrabbled for the scrap of birth record lying on the floor. She held it up with shaking hands. "This is part of the truth, ain't it? My truth. And I can't even ask him why he had it." Malachi finally touched her. Just a hand on her back, rough, warm, steady. She leaned into it like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. "You ain't alone," he murmured, but the words barely made a dent in the storm ripping through her. "He died thinking I hated him," she whispered. "I yelled at him last week, told him he made my life hell, told him I wished he'd just stop drinking, stop making trouble, stop—" Her voice cracked apart. "Stop being my father." Malachi's hand tightened gently. "You were hurt. You didn't mean it." "I did," she whispered. "And now he's gone." Her sobs came quieter then, not weaker, just deeper, the kind that came from a place she'd never let herself reach before. All the years of humiliation, judgment, hunger, loneliness, they burst through the dam at once. When the storm inside her finally slowed, she whispered, hollow and terrified, "What if he died because of me?" Malachi's voice was firm, protective in a way that wrapped around her like a shield. "Don't you ever blame yourself for the rot in other men's hearts." She closed her eyes, but guilt was a heavy thing, and it clung. Minutes stretched, maybe hours. The oil lamp flickered low. Finally, Lena pushed herself upright. "I need to see him." "They already took him to the church," Malachi said quietly. "Pike said they would prepare the body." Lena felt her jaw clench. "Pike don't get to prepare nothing of my father's." "You want me to come with you?" She nodded once, trembling. They stepped outside. The night was cool and mercilessly still, but halfway down the path, something caught Malachi's eye. Smoke. Not from the church, from the direction of the Hart cabin. "Lena," Malachi breathed, "stay behind me." Her heart turned to ice. No, no, that can't be. They reached the ridge overlooking her homestead. Flames clawed at the sky. Her cabin, her whole life, burned like a funeral pyre. Lena's fragile grief shattered into a scream. No! Malachi grabbed her around the waist before she could run headlong into the blaze. The fire roared, hungry, deliberate. This wasn't an accident. And Lena Hart, shaking in Malachi's arms, understood one brutal, undeniable truth. Red dust wasn't done taken from her. Not yet. The closer they got to the Hart cabin, the harder the night seemed to breathe, like the darkness itself recoiled from the flames devouring what little Lena had left. The fire raged high, snapping through the shingles with greedy hands. Sparks burst upward, drifting like cursed fireflies toward the stars. Lena tore herself from Malachi's grip and stumbled forward. My books, my students' slates. I left Maggie's letters inside. Lena! Malachi caught her wrist. You can't go in there. That roof's ready to fall. I don't care, she sobbed. Everything I had. Everything. But before she could fight past him, a shout came from behind the burning shed. Help! Miss Lena! Help! A child's voice. Lena's breath snapped in half. Maggie? No, Malachi said sharply. Stay here. But she lunged toward the voice anyway. Behind the cabin, through the smoke, she saw 3 small shadows trapped against the old woodpile. Maggie, Jonah, and another boy from her lessons. Smoke curled around them, thick as a fist. Miss Lena, Maggie cried. Lena sprinted. Her lungs burned instantly, but something feral in her pushed past the pain. She dropped to her knees, scooping Maggie and Jonah in her arms. Come on, babies, follow my voice, she said, choking on ash. Malachi appeared through the smoke a heartbeat later, lifting the last boy under his arm like he weighed nothing. Move, he barked. They tore across the yard, stumbling through heat, coughing, half-blind. Behind them, a beam snapped in the cabin with a sound like a giant bone breaking. And then, boom! The roof collapsed inward in a shower of sparks. Maggie screamed. Jonah buried his face against Lena's shoulder. Lena froze, staring at the ruins. Her bed, her mother's patched quilt, her few books, her first chalkboard, the lesson drafts she protected like prayers, the last shirt she hadn't mended yet. Everything. Gone. No slow fade. No time to salvage. Just gone. Malachi set the boy down carefully and turned to her. Lena. She didn't hear him. The world was roaring too loud. A group of men stood near the creek, shadows backlit by flames. They weren't helping. They were watching, laughing. The same men who'd jeered at the market post. Her vision tunneled. One of them, Hank Doolin, spat into the dirt. Told y'all, fire cleans filth better'n prayer. Another snorted. Shoulda done it while her daddy was still around. A third voice cut in. Ain't about her daddy. It's the blood she carries. The kind that brings trouble. Blood. Always blood. Her fists clenched at her sides. Malachi stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. You boys startin' a fire this close to coal land. They paused. watching him, judging him. A black rancher standing between them and their cruelty. One man muttered, "Ain't your place to question decent folk." But none took a step closer. Not with Malachi, Cole looking at them like that. Calm, steady, lethal. One by one they slunk away, cowards slipping into darkness. When the last boot faded into night, Lena's knees gave out. She sank into the dirt. Jonah clung to her arm. Maggie cried into her shoulder. The heat from the dying fire washed over her, but she felt cold, frozen from the inside out. "My home," she whispered. "My father, my work, all of it. They took all of it." Malachi knelt beside her. "Lena, listen to me." "Why?" she choked. "Why do they hate me this much? What did I ever do?" Her voice cracked with something beyond grief, something ancient, something inherited. "Because of your name?" she whispered to the night. "Because of blood I didn't choose?" Malachi reached out slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. "They ain't scared of your blood, Lena." His jaw tightened. "They're scared of what you become if you stop apologizing for it." She looked at him, tears streaking dirt on her cheeks. "I have nothing, Malachi. Nothing left to rebuild with." He shook his head. "You ain't staying here." "I have nowhere else." "You do now." He rose to his feet and offered her his hand. Not the kind of gesture asking permission. A promise. A declaration. Maggie and Jonah watched with wide, fearful eyes. Lena hesitated. Her palm burned from where flames had licked it. Her chest ached from losses stacked higher than the fire behind her. But Malachi didn't move, didn't waver. And for the first time since childhood, Lena felt something unfamiliar. Someone waiting for her. Not out of pity, but choice. She placed her hand in his. He lifted her gently, slipping an arm around her when she stumbled. "We're going to Coal Creek Ranch," he said softly. "Tonight." She swallowed a sob. "Malachi, they'll come after you next." "Let 'em try." He looked back at the burning cabin, jaw stone set. "You ain't dying in Red Dust's dirt," he said. "Not tonight, not ever." As they walked away, the fire crackled behind them, an ending and a warning. Lena didn't look back. There was nothing left there to save. Coal Creek Ranch woke before the sun did. Malachi had barely slept. One arm draped protectively across Lena's shoulders on the spare cot, listening for hooves, for boots crunching gravel, for any sign the night wasn't done chasing them. When dawn finally cracked over the hills, he knew trouble hadn't passed. It was marching straight toward them. By mid-morning, Lena stood on the porch of the ranch house, wrapped in one of Malachi's old flannel shirts. The sleeves swallowed her hands. Her face still carried ash smudges, and her hair smelled faintly of smoke no matter how many times she tried to wash it out. Every so often, she'd glance toward the horizon where her cabin used to stand, until Malachi gently touched her elbow, grounding her back. "You're safe here," he murmured. She nodded, but safety felt like a word someone else deserved. Then the sound came. Hoofbeats. Many. Malachi stepped forward, shoulders squaring like a man who'd been preparing for this moment his whole life. "They're early," he muttered. "Who?" Lena whispered, though she already knew. The dust plume rose first, long before the silhouettes appeared. Then came flash of metal from badges, coat buttons, buckles, the red sash of Reverend Pike, the polished cane of Mayor Silas Greeley, and a half-dozen ranch hands loyal to no one but money. The group reined in at the front gate, 30 yards from the porch. Silas tugged off his gloves with a theatrical sigh. "Well now," he called out. "Looks like Coal Creek's acquired itself a new tenant." Lena stiffened. Pike surveyed her with an expression carved from disdain. "A woman of questionable blessing should not be housed among decent men," he declared. "We're here for a resolution." "Resolution to what?" Malachi asked, voice calm, almost bored. Pike held up a paper. "The Moral Committee has deemed Miss Lena Hart a disruptive element. She must be turned over for questioning concerning last night's fire." Lena inhaled sharply. "You think I burned my own home?" Silas raised a brow. "Guilt's a funny thing. Folk do strange acts when shame is in their veins." Lena felt something hot flare in her chest, but Malachi stepped half a pace in front of her. "You come to blame her," he said quietly, "or to finish what your boys started." Silas's face tightened. "We're not here to argue with a man who barely holds claim to his own land." Klein, standing behind them with his ledger, cleared his throat nervously. "There's, still the matter of Mr. Cole's attendance at Town Hall." Silas seized the thread instantly. "Yes. Cole, you were summoned. You chose to ignore the request. That is grounds for an immediate review of your ownership." "I didn't ignore nothin'," Malachi replied. "I chose not to play your game." Pike stepped forward, tapping his Bible. "Scripture teaches a man must submit to rightful authority." "Funny," Malachi said. "I don't recall any scripture about burning down a woman's home." A ripple moved through the men behind Silas. For the first time, doubt cracked through someone's stance. Pike pressed on. "We demand Miss Hart be surrendered to church custody." Lena whispered, "No, please, no." Malachi's fingers brushed hers behind his back, a silent promise. "You ain't taking her," he said. Silas's face purpled. "You are harboring a criminal." "A victim," Malachi corrected. "A corrupting influence." "A teacher." Pike snapped. "A woman born of shame." A hush fell. Lena's breath hitched, throat tightening painfully, not at the insult, but because those words mirrored her father's drunken mutterings, mirrored the gossip of every street in red dust. She felt her old instinct rising, shrink, withdraw, disappear. But Malachi took her hand, openly this time, and stepped closer to her so the whole town could see. "Say what you want about me," he said, "but you won't talk about her that way here." Silas blinked as if slapped. "You would risk this ranch? Everything you own for her?" Malachi didn't hesitate. "I ain't risking nothing. This land ain't worth a damn if I can't protect someone who deserves better than red dust ever gave." The air trembled. Even the horses pawed uneasily. Lena's eyes burned, not with fear, but something she hadn't felt in years. Someone standing between her and the world without expecting her to earn it first. Maggie's voice suddenly piped up from the barn door. "She ain't done nothing wrong." Head snapped toward the little girl, and beside her stood Jonah and 5 other students. They had followed Malachi and Lena in the night, refusing to leave, sleeping in hay bales until dawn. Silas sneered. "Children don't belong in this discussion." "No," Malachi said. "They belong in every discussion about this woman." Lena found her voice, soft but steady. "You're not taking them neither." Silas's jaw clenched. "If you continue defying the committee, Cole, we will strip your land under the charter." "Then host the whole town here," Malachi said. "Bring whoever wants the truth. Bring 'em all." Lena tugged his sleeve. "Malachi, don't—" "It's time," he said simply. The children slipped beside Lena like a small army, fearful but fiercely loyal. Maggie grabbed Lena's hand, tiny fingers curling tight. Silas stared at them all, at Malachi's stance, Lena's trembling but unbroken posture, the children united around her. For the first time, he saw something he couldn't control. A community forming without his permission. He spat dust, yanked his reins, and snarled, "Fine, tomorrow, noon, before the whole town. You want a reckoning? You'll have one." The posse turned and thundered back toward red dust, anger trailing behind like smoke. When the dust settled, Lena exhaled shakily. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. Malachi looked down at her, steady, warm, unafraid. "Lena Hart," he said softly, "I'd do worse. For you." And for the first time since the fire, she believed him. Noon and red dust came down like judgment. The entire town gathered in front of the old hall. Farmhands, wives clutching shawls, kids pressed between legs, men with guns hanging easy on their hips. It felt less like a meeting and more like an execution waiting for a name. Malachi stood near the steps, shoulders squared, boots planted like the land itself braced through him. Lena stayed close but slightly behind, heart hammering inside a borrowed shirt. She still smelled faintly of smoke. Every stare burned. Maggie and Jonah refused to leave her side. Mayor Silas arrived last, Reverend Pike at his shoulder, both wearing confidence like armor. Pike even carried his Bible like a weapon blessed by fire. Silas raised his hands. "Citizens of Red Dust, we are gathered to bring clarity to the chaos brought by Miss Lena Hart and the man harboring her." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Malachi didn't move. "Go on then. Bring your clarity." Silas smirked. "First, Miss Hart is to answer for the suspicious fire at her residence." "Suspicious?" Malachi cut in. "You mean the one your boys watched burn?" Gasps. The mayor's eyes hardened. "Do not interrupt the committee." Pike stepped forward, voice oily smooth. "Miss Hart's presence has long stirred unrest. Born into sin, raised in disorder." Lena flinched. Not at the insult. She'd heard worse. But because all those watching seemed to nod along. The noose of judgment tightened. Malachi spoke loud enough for everyone. We didn't come to hear your gospel of shame, Reverend. We came for the truth. And what truth do you possess? Silas scoffed. Malachi reached into his coat. Lena felt her breath hitch. He pulled out the yellowed scrap of paper, Elias's last possession, the birth record fragment. The crowd leaned forward. Malachi held it up, voice steady. This here is what Elias Hart tried to tell me before he died. Something he didn't get time to finish. Silas shifted, just a little. But Lena saw it. Saw fear prick the corner of his eye like a knife point. Malachi unfolded the paper. It's part of a birth certificate for a baby girl, born near Silverton. Mother, Ida May. Woman run out of red dust years ago. Folks said she was trouble. Truth is, she was scared and alone. The name rippled through the crowd like a ghost. Pike's jaw locked. You speak of things you do not understand. Malachi ignored him. And the father's name, he paused, was scratched out, rewritten, scratched out again. The crowd murmured. Lena felt the blood drain from her hands. Silas barked, birth records are irrelevant. The committee... Malachi stepped up the hall steps until he stood nearly eye to eye with the mayor. At the bottom, he said quietly, in the ink they didn't manage to scrape off. I can still read the first letter of that man's name. He turned the paper toward the crowd. The faint smear of ink, barely a curve, barely a line, but unmistakable. SG. A collective gasp erupted. Silas went pale. Malachi's voice rang out, unshaken. Silas Greeley, mayor, committee head, father to a child he hid from the world, a child he let be raised by a drunk because acknowledging her meant exposing every lie he built this town on. The world stopped. The sky might as well have caved in. Lena couldn't breathe. The words hit like a bullet to the chest. Silas nearly choked. That is a damned lie. But the sweat at his temple betrayed him. Reverend Pike took a step back, as if distancing himself would erase his part. Malachi's voice sharpened. You let folks beat her down her whole life, call her blood dirty, call her unworthy. But it was your blood you were trying to bury. Silas's mask cracked. She was born from wickedness. No, Malachi thundered. She was born from you, and you spent her whole life punishing her for it. The crowd erupted into whispers, horrified, curious, judgment turning back toward its creators. Lena staggered a step, steadying herself on Maggie's shoulder. My father, she whispered. Elias lied? Or he protected me? Malachi turned, softening. He saved you, Lena, hid you from the man who would have erased your name. Her heart broke wide open, pain, anger, grief tangled into something massive and uncontrollable. Silas, now shaking with fury, pointed at her. She's a curse, a stain. Her mother seduced. Her mother was your mistress, a woman in the crowd blurted out. Everyone knew. The murmurs intensified. Malachi wasn't done. He raised another scrap, tiny, folded tight. And this? This belonged to Maggie and Jonah. The crowd stilled. A matching fragment. Same handwriting. Same seal. Maggie and Jonah stiffened, eyes wide. Malachi said quietly, "They're not the first children this town tried to erase. Just the latest." A man cursed under his breath. A woman covered her mouth. Wrath and disbelief spread like wildfire. Lena's tears blurred her vision. Not weak tears, no. The tears of someone whose whole life suddenly made horrifying, devastating sense. She lifted her chin, voice trembling but fierce. "You took my name," she said to Silas. "You took my mother. You took my childhood. But you—" She pointed at Malachi, breathing hard. "You don't get to take who I am now." Silas screamed, "Grab her!" But no one moved. Not this time. Because the truth, ugly, staggering, undeniable, was out. And the whole town of Red Dust finally saw who the real sinner was. The truth didn't silence the town. It ignited it. Voices exploded, shouts, gasps, curses, prayers spoken through trembling lips. Some people looked at Lena like she'd risen from the grave. Others looked at Silas like they'd finally seen the devil wearing a gentleman's coat. Silas, shaking with rage, lunged toward the nearest of his hired guns. "Take her!" he barked. "Now!" The gunman hesitated. Only a moment. But hesitation was enough for panic to stir through the crowd. Malachi stepped in front of Lena, drawing himself up tall, unshakably calm. "You'd best think real hard about who you aim at, boy." Silas snarled, "Shoot him if you must. He's defying a lawful order." The gunman lifted his revolver. His hand trembled, not from fear of Silas, but fear of Malachi Cole, who stood like a mountain refusing to move. Lena's heart crashed inside her chest. Not again. Not another life stolen because of her blood. Before Malachi could speak, she stepped around him, fast, sure, sudden. She planted herself directly in front of the gun. Her voice rang out sharp as a whip crack. "If you want to shoot something dirty, shoot me, 'cause I'm the blood you're all so scared of." A stunned silence swept the square. The gunman froze, eyes wide. Malachi's voice broke through the stillness, low, desperate. "Lena, no." But she didn't move, didn't blink. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding behind shame. She was staring straight at it. Silas roared, "Do it! End this farce!" Lena lifted her chin. Her voice steadied, even as her hands trembled. "You burned my home. You left my daddy to die without prayer or witness. You told the whole world I was worth less than the dust under your boots." She took a step closer to the barrel. "But you ain't taken one more child's name. Not one more." Something broke then. Not in Lena, but in the town. Women clutched their children. Ranchers muttered darkly. The facade of Silas's authority cracked, falling away to reveal something rotten and small. Reverend Pike, red-faced and shaking, snapped, "She's like her mother, defiant, wicked, loud, just like that night when we tore the babe from her arms." The crowd collectively sucked in a breath. Lena's blood went cold. Malachi's head turned sharply. "What did you just say?" Pike paled. I meant—" But it was too late. The truth had slipped, filthy and undeniable. A woman screamed. "You stole her from her mama?" Murmurs turned to growls. Mr. Klein, who'd always seemed too timid to matter, suddenly stepped forward. "I was there that night," he whispered. "I saw Pike carrying a newborn out the back of the church. I thought it was charity. God forgive me." Pike stumbled back. "You don't understand. She was a danger. Sin breeds sin." "No!" someone shouted. "Men like you breed sin." Silas, losing ground fast, grabbed Pike's arm. Shut up before you bury us both." The gunman lowered his revolver. "I ain't shooting nobody in cold blood," he muttered, stepping away. "Especially not a girl standing for what's right." Silas's face twisted. "You cowards!" Malachi finally moved, stepping beside Lena, arm brushing hers, voice low and rough. "Get behind me." "No," she whispered. "Not this time." Their eyes locked, a heartbeat that felt like a vow. She kept her voice loud enough for all to hear. "My mama fought for me, died for me. My daddy spent his life protecting me. And Malachi," her voice wavered, "he stood for me when nobody else would. I'm done letting you make me small." Silas snatched the gun from his own man, rage dissolving the last pieces of reason. He raised it. Malachi moved to shield Lena. But Maggie's voice rang out, shrill, terrified. "Marshall's coming! I told him everything!" Every head turned. Dust rose on the horizon. 3 riders, badges glinting. Silas faltered. Just enough. Malachi seized the moment. He stepped forward, standing between Silas and every child Pike and Silas had ever tried to erase. "You fire that gun," he said quietly, "and you'll die with nothing left to hide behind." Silas looked around, the entire town staring at him with disgust, not obedience. He realized, too late, that he had already fired the only shot that mattered, the one that revealed his sins. His arm dropped. The crowd surged, not violently, but with purpose. They stepped between Silas and Lena. For the first time ever, they protected her. Lena felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but relief. Malachi's hand found the small of her back. "You did good," he whispered. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I know," he said, "but you stood anyway." She exhaled, trembling. "What now?" He looked at the approaching marshals. "Now," he murmured, "justice finally rides into red dust." The marshals took Silas and Reverend Pike away before sunset, but the echoes of the gunshot and the crowd's shouting hung over red dust long after. The town had never been so quiet, stunned rather than peaceful. Malachi didn't stay to watch. He guided Lena from the scene, Jonah and Maggie close behind, like shadows refusing to leave her. "You need rest," he murmured. "I need purpose," she whispered. He didn't tell her she was shaken. He simply nodded. Then we'll build you something worth waking up for. For 2 days, the town kept its distance, not with hatred this time, but shame and unease. The marshals treated her with a respect she wasn't used to. Still, her heart remained raw, unsure where to place its weight. At Coal Creek Ranch, something steadier waited, hands ready to hold her upright, voices that said, "Miss Lena," with admiration, silence that didn't judge. On the 3rd morning, Malachi found her behind the barn, staring at the charred remains of the flannel he'd wrapped around her the night her cabin burned. Her eyes were far away. Her past still clung to her. Malachi approached, carrying something behind his back. "You got a minute?" She nodded, wiping her cheek even though she knew he'd already seen the tears. He revealed the object, the old rusted horseshoe he'd once left on her door. Only now it gleamed. "You cleaned it?" "Not just cleaned, had it reforged." She touched the warm metal, the pits and dents smoothed away. "It's beautiful. Figured you might like it hanging somewhere that ain't burning down." He nodded toward the far side of the ranch. Lena gasped. A new cabin stood there, small, newly framed, roof half-finished but sturdy. A home, a place where no one could drag her out to punish her for teaching. A place where no one called her cursed. "This is for me and for the young ones," he said with a soft smile. "You said you needed purpose. Thought we'd start by giving you a place to teach that won't fall over when a coyote sneezes." She laughed through her tears. "You built this in 3 days?" "I had help." 6 children peeked from behind hay bales, grinning, coated in sawdust. Maggie waved a tiny hammer. Jonah lifted a board twice his size. "They don't owe me anything," Lena whispered. "They don't," Malachi said gently. "They chose you." Overwhelmed, she let him lead her to the new cabin. She didn't take his offered arm. She linked hers through his like a partner. Inside, unfinished pine walls glowed gold in the morning light. A small stove, a work table, pegs for slates. In the center lay a burlap bundle. Lena opened it to find chalk, slates, books, quills, rescued before Pike could seize them. "They saved all this," she whispered. "Kids know worth when adults don't ruin it for 'em." She walked the room with reverence, touching every beam, every hope built into the boards. When she asked about the children in town and whether Pike could take them again, Malachi's answer was firm. Coal Creek Ranch was federal recognized land. The marshals had made it clear. The children who chose to stay were protected. "So they're safe?" "As long as I'm breathing." Relief flooded her. She threw her arms around him. He froze for one heartbeat, then held her with tenderness and unspoken vows. "You're home now," he whispered. She believed him. He placed the reforged horseshoe into her hands. "Your classroom needs a door knocker." She hung it gently on the new door. The soft metallic clink sounded like a beginning. 3 years passed as steadily as sunrise. Coal Creek Ranch, once quiet and haunted, grew loud with footsteps, lessons, and hope. Each morning, children tapped the horseshoe knocker to call Lena awake. The gentle sound reminded her she was no longer alone. Maggie, now taller, proudly showed her a slate with her full name, Maggie Klein. Jonah, lanky and nearly a teen, talked about learning contracts so no one could steal his name. Malachi looked at Lena when he said that, because her name had nearly been taken, too. The schoolhouse had grown to hold 12 students, ranch orphans, abandoned children, and those Pike once sought to control. Now they were under Malachi's guardianship, a family built by choice. "You're safe here," Lena always reminded them. And they believed her, because Malachi Cole kept his promises. One morning, a 4-year-old girl brought Lena a tin cup. "You forgot your morning bell," she chirped, pointing at the horseshoe knocker. Lena scooped her up, remembering the starving, silent child she once was. Now she laughed freely. "She's getting attached," Malachi said. "So am I," Lena whispered. That evening, after chores, Lena and Malachi walked the ridge, a ritual of quiet truths. She carried a lantern. He carried warm cornbread, like he had the night they'd first spoken at the post. "Schoolhouse is fuller than ever," he teased. "Kids need a place," she said. "I'm just building what I wish I'd had." "You're rebuilding what they tried to destroy." She stopped. "You saved me." "No," he murmured. "I showed you where you belonged." He took out a folded note, the one she'd left the day she tried to run. "The bread I once feared, I kept it," he said, "to remember you weren't running from me, just from being alone." Her breath trembled. "I'm not running anymore." He brushed her cheek and kissed her, a slow, certain promise. Back at the ranch, children's laughter rose from the bunkhouse, a home woven from second chances. Lena leaned against him. "I never thought my name would mean anything." "It means everything," he said, "and nobody's taken it from you." She looked across the land, cabins glowing warm, fences stretching into dusk, a sanctuary built from grief into hope. These kids, no one's taken their names either. Not while I'm breathing. Under the western stars, surrounded by the family she chose and who chose her, Lena Hart stepped fully into a life where her name was no longer a curse. It was a story reclaimed, a story passed on, a story no one could erase again. We upload new stories several times a week, crafted as soft-spoken narrations designed for relaxation, comfort, and reflection. Whether you're listening with a warm drink at dusk or winding down at night, these stories are meant to feel like an old friend sitting beside you. If this kind of storytelling speaks to your heart, we'd be honored to have you join our little frontier family. Subscribe, follow, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next tale riding your way.